This is the Real Estate Investing Abundance Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. I know you're excited to get into today's show, but I have a very exciting announcement to share with you before moving to the show. We've just launched a complimentary and comprehensive webinar that, among other things, shows you how to legally use passive real estate investing to reduce your taxes, recession-proof your nest egg, and take the sting out of inflation. If you are curious to learn more, go to stevetucker.com/webinar. It is complimentary and only takes a couple of minutes of your time. Once again, that is stevetucker.com/webinar. I'll see you in the webinar. Enjoy today's show. Hello, enlightened investors, and welcome back to Real Estate Investing Abundance. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. We're going to take a look today, and actually we're going to take a deep dive into the art and science of real estate negotiations. We have an expert in that area with us today. Jay Scott is an entrepreneur, investor, advisor, author, and partner at Bar Down Investments. He focuses on buying and repositioning large multifamily properties. In the past 14 years, Jay has bought, built, rehabbed, sold, lent on, and held over $150 million in property nationwide. Jay holds strategic advisor roles in several companies and is the author of 5 BiggerPockets books on real estate investing. Jay, tell us about a memorable experience that helped you to be the person you are today.
I love that question, and I'm going to go with one that's kind of top of mind because my kids and I were having this discussion last night. Growing up, school came very easy for me. A lot of things came easy. I'm fortunate that I have this logic thing going on in my head that school was always easy and classes were easy and tests were easy. I'm a good test taker. And so I kind of cruised through elementary school, middle school, and high school, my first couple of years of college. And then I got into my junior year of college. I was an electrical engineering major at University of Maryland. And I took this class. Don't even remember what the class was. It was Electrical Engineering 380. And it was the hardest class I ever took. And I failed. And so I had to retake the class. I was conceited. I was a little bit cocky, thinking, okay, well, I just had a bad run at that one, but I don't need to work hard because everything has always come easy to me. So I took the class again. I failed it a second time. And I think that concerned me a little bit more, but I don't think I really thought too much of it because it was kind of just a one-off. And I guess I had 2 bad semesters. So I took a class the third time. I failed the class the third time.
Wow.
Now, after failing a class 3 times, and I was a good student, this was an anomaly for me. I had to go to the dean and basically ask for an exception to take the class a 4th time. And basically what he said to me was, this is your last chance. And I'll let you take it a 4th time, but if you don't do well in this class the 4th time, you're out of the program. And so again, this was my career path. And so it kind of made me open up my eyes to the fact that intelligence and aptitude isn't a replacement for hard work. And I remember having to learn how to study that next semester. I remember having to learn how to actually spend time and effort to gain knowledge and to gain experience. And it was a very formative semester for me because it made me realize that for the previous 10, 15 years of my life, I was coasting. I was getting by on my natural abilities. And natural abilities can only get you so far. And if you don't know how to put in the hard work and couple the hard work with your natural abilities, at some point you're going to hit a wall. And so for me, that was kind of the eye-opening experience that if I don't work hard, no matter what my natural born abilities might be, if I don't work hard, I'm going to hit that wall at some point. I'm going to fail. And so lucky for me, I realized that before I got out into the real world. But it's always kind of stuck with me. That no matter how much natural aptitude you might have, hard work has to be coupled with it for true success.
Have you read the book Grit by Angela Davis?
I have.
Yeah.
I have. Very good book.
Yeah, that is actually really the theme of her book, that natural talent will take you only so far, and that high performers aren't necessarily the most gifted in their areas. They're the most dedicated and hardworking people in that. So yeah, well, a good lesson to learn at a young age, and I'm sure it has served you well throughout life. Jay, let's just start off. If you would just share with us where and when did you begin your real estate journey, and really what led you in that direction?
Yeah, so I spent about 15, 16, 17 years in the tech industry. My wife and I both lived in Silicon Valley in California, both works for some big tech companies. And then when we decided to get married in 2008, we realized that our lifestyle, being in the tech industry, working 80 hours a week, traveling 2, 3 weeks a month, just wasn't conducive to starting a family and raising a family. So we made the relatively easy decision that we were just going to quit our jobs and we were going to find another line of work that would allow us to prioritize family over work and making money. And we fell into real estate. And so we started flipping houses in 2008. Between 2008 and 2016, we flipped a little over 400 houses, somewhere between 400 and 450 houses. And then in 2016, got a little bit burnt out on single family residential real estate and transitioned into larger multifamily real estate where we are today.
Well, interesting that you left your high tech jobs to have more time and with your family and what have you. I can't imagine that you found that in rehabbing and flipping houses. That's a job.
It is. It is. It's very much a job, and it's something nobody had explained to me on day one. I wish they would have, or if they had, I probably wouldn't have listened. And so it's been a tremendous learning experience over the last 15 years as an entrepreneur. And what I've realized is that there are benefits and there are drawbacks. Certainly, we work, I'm not going to say as many hours as we did in the tech industry, but we work a lot of hours. But the benefit is that for the most part, we get to trail our own path. We get to decide when we work and what we work on. And if there's something that isn't aligned well with family or conducive to raising a family, we can choose not to do it. Now, obviously, we have to accept those consequences, but we very much get to make the trade-offs and the everyday decisions as opposed to having an employer make those decisions for us. So yeah, I found that being an entrepreneur is very much a 24/7 job, much like it was in the tech industry. But at the same time, we can make those trade-offs and we can make those personal decisions, even if there are consequences that come with them when it comes to things like taking a week off to go on vacation or never working during a kid's soccer game or piano recital or something like that. And so for us, even though there are certainly challenges that come along with entrepreneurship, I think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks.
Yeah. Well, let's get into negotiations.
Sure.
And they certainly are a critical part of a real estate investment portfolio. So if you would just start us off by taking us through it, the step-by-step process of negotiation.
Well, the funny thing is there's no step-by-step process. It really is as much art as it is science. There are some tips that will allow people to be better negotiators. And the funny thing is when I talk to people, when I give presentations on negotiating, when I talk to people about negotiating, everybody's kind of looking for that magic bullet, that silver bullet. What's the trick of the trade that will allow them to be successful? And at the end of the day, it really goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is just hard work, putting in the time and putting in the effort. And so if I had to pick the single biggest contributor to negotiating success, it's the willingness and the ability to do research. There's a saying in negotiation that he who is most prepared is most likely going to win in the negotiation. And whether you want to use the word win or not, I think a lot of people don't like that word win because a good negotiation results in both sides getting what they want. But if you want to get what you want, knowledge and research and information about the situation, the other party, the asset that you're negotiating for is tremendously important. And so what we've found is in the real estate world, there are different levels of negotiation. And there's different levels of research and knowledge. And so it starts at the high level, like understanding what the market is offering and where the market is, where the economic cycle is. And so knowing whether we're in a buyer's market or a seller's market. because a lot of times, regardless of the specific negotiation, regardless of the asset that's being negotiated or the circumstances of the other party's perspective on what they should be getting out of the deal is going to be related to bigger picture issues. So, for example, I've gone into negotiations where it was clear that the seller was desperate, needed to sell their property. I knew I had some leverage. I knew I had the ability to negotiate probably a good price. And then I get in, and the seller, their attitude is it's a seller's market. And so I shouldn't have to discount my property. And so they're kind of ignoring the fact that they're in a really bad situation. They might be facing foreclosure. They might be facing some other situation that they really need to sell. But all they're thinking about is the macro perspective of it's a good market, and they should be getting a high price for their property. So understand that sellers aren't always rational, and sometimes it's these macro issues that are going to be driving their beliefs. So knowing where we are in the economic cycle, knowing if it's a seller's market, if it's a buyer's market, and how that might influence the party on the other side of the table, that's number one. Next is understanding at the specific market level, so at the neighborhood level. So I'm a big fan of, before I make an offer on a property, and my wife is kind of the master negotiator in the family. She does a lot of this boots on the ground stuff. But if we're going to go buy a property, my wife will literally knock on the doors of all the neighbors of that property and start asking questions. So they want to know who's lived in that property for how long, what's the reputation of the owner of that property. Has there been any flooding in the property? Has there been any major situations with the property? Do the neighbors know anything that we can't get from public records or from talking to the buyer or the seller themselves? So basically using people around the property to gain additional information, and then doing research on the specific buyer or seller themselves. We had a situation, and we talked about this in our book, where we were selling a property, and this was 2012, 13, long time ago. We were selling a property, and it sat on the market for a long time, and we we're getting ready to reduce the price. And just before we reduced the price, we had a buyer come through and look at the property, and they told us they were going to make an offer, and they ended up putting in a low offer. Now, not so low that we weren't willing to consider it because we were getting ready to drop the price, but lower than a good bit lower than list price at the time. And so my wife, first thing she did is she looked at the contract. She found the names of the buyers. They were out of town buyers. I think they were from Wisconsin or Michigan. And so she jumped on social media and started looking at their social media posts. She started looking at their LinkedIn profile. And she happened to find a Facebook post that they made where the wife was kind of documenting, and it was only the wife who had seen the property. She was kind of documenting her trip to Georgia. The property was in Georgia, looking for a house to buy for her and her fiance. And so we saw multiple posts about how she was having trouble finding a house, and she had put in a couple offers and didn't get anything accepted. And she had done a post that morning about how they found what they think is the perfect house. They put in an offer. She's heading back to either Michigan or Wisconsin, whichever it was, the next day. And so she was waiting to hear, and she seemed really excited about the property. And we knew just from that post that we had a lot of leverage. One, we knew that she loved the property. I think she had mentioned, in fact, we in the book, we actually have a screenshot of that Facebook post. And I think in there it mentioned that she had a friend that lived like in the same neighborhood or something. So we knew that they were motivated to buy this property for no other reason than she was ending her house hunting trip the next day. And so this was probably the last property she was going to offer on. And so we knew at that point, we didn't need to, or probably didn't need to, accept that low offer. So we countered it very close to full price, and ultimately we got it. And so in a situation where we were getting ready to lower the price, where we would have been happy with the price that she had offered, doing a little bit of research on that particular buyer allowed us to determine that they were more motivated than they let on, or than we might have assumed from their offer. And it encouraged us to be more aggressive in our counteroffer. And ultimately we saved, I don't remember, it was probably $5,000 or $10,000 on that deal just by doing a little bit of research. And so it's just a good anecdote about how and why just being able to do research and spend some time getting information about the property, the neighborhood, the market, and the person on the other side of the table can really help you, again, don't like to say win, but help you do well in a negotiation.
Enlightened investors, if you haven't done so already, be sure and click that like button and also click that share so others can take advantage of the content. And finally, Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our upcoming episodes. Well, thank you for that detail. I've never heard anyone in terms of talking about negotiations that really talk about doing that background research too, certainly to that extent of going to the neighborhood, knocking on the doors and finding out about that. And I have really never heard anyone say that it's important to know the seller and certainly to really understand what their motivation is. But I can see the advantages of that and going into that negotiation with that. I mean, you talk about winning, but you also, it is actually setting up a win-win scenario because you understand what it is that the seller wants and what the seller needs, and that's creating a win for them as well. Uh,
Yeah.
Obviously, in the example you gave, the seller didn't attain that low offer, but in reality, that wasn't what was really important to her as a buyer.
Exactly. The other thing that we have to realize is when it comes to real estate negotiation, it's a lot different than most other types of negotiations that we're going to enter into during our lives. A real estate transaction is a long transaction. Even from the day that you enter into the negotiation phase, you're probably looking at a month or 2 months between the time that you start negotiating and you close on the property. It could be much longer than that. When you factor in the time it takes or the time you should spend building rapport with the buyer or seller before you even enter into the negotiation phase, negotiations in real estate can take months or even years. And so building rapport with the other person, building a relationship, building trust is extremely important. If you walk into a market and you negotiate some widget on the shelf, at the end of the day, it really comes down to price because there's not enough time for any other concessions or anything else to be brought into the negotiation. But for real estate, a lot of times we can bring a whole lot of other things in. And so another story that we talked about in the book was a property that one of the first properties we bought. We got a call on a Sunday morning one morning from our title rep, who was also our attorney in Georgia. Basically, deals are closed with attorneys, and he said he and his wife were on a walk and they passed basically a garage sale and estate sale in their neighborhood, and they started talking to the woman that was doing it. It turns out her mother had recently passed away, and so she was just kind of selling off the stuff in the house, and he had asked whether she was going to sell the house, and she said, yeah, at some point we're going to sell. And he called us, and we drove a half hour up there to basically kind of just do some reconnaissance, and my wife ended up talking to the woman and was completely honest. We buy houses and we renovate them, and is she interested in selling the house? And my wife is a tremendously empathetic person who, I mean, a lot of people that we've done deals with over the years, she's become friends with because that's just her nature. And this woman was basically honest and said, I'm not ready to sell now. I haven't like gotten my head around the fact that my mom just died and all that. And my wife basically sat there and helped with the estate sale for a couple hours and talked to the woman, and they became friends. And over the next year, they sort of kept in touch. And Christmas comes the following year, and my wife sends her a Christmas card and just said, hey, I'm thinking about you. I hope you're doing okay this first Christmas without your mom. Just really sincere. At that point, we had no expectation of ever buying the house because it just wasn't going that direction. A few weeks later, the woman picks up the phone and calls my wife and said, I think I'm ready. And I'd really like to sell it to you guys. You've been awesome. And again, it wasn't our primary objective to try and get her to sell the house at that point. My wife had just built a relationship with this woman and was just being a good person. But at the end of the day, that relationship that she had built convinced the woman that we might be the right people to sell the house to. And so she gave us the first opportunity to buy it, and we did. And it's just a good reminder that people like to do business with people they like, with people they know, with people they trust. And so just building that relationship, it didn't solidify our ability to get that property, but it gave us a leg up over our competition. And again, it has to be authentic. If you're going to do that from a place of selfishness and build relationships just to get stuff, people will see through that. But if you're truly empathetic, if you're truly interested in helping other people and building relationships, you're going to find that that's probably one of the best ways to improve your ability to get deals and to negotiate.
Jay, you have a lot of experience in real estate and you have written several books. So tell us about your books and what they entail and where we can get hold of those.
Yeah, certainly. So I've written 5 books. My attitude when it comes to writing books is I love to teach, but I'm not going to do it unless I feel like I can write something that hasn't been written before, or I can do it better than what's been written before. And so the 5 topics that I've chosen kind of all fall into one of those 2 categories. The first 2 books that I wrote were on flipping houses and estimating rehab costs. I wrote those because I found that when I started out, there's a lot of books on flipping houses, but most of them were from a motivational standpoint. They didn't really address the nuts and bolts, step by step methodology for flipping houses. So I wanted to write kind of from an engineer's perspective how to flip houses. Estimating rehab costs, I wrote because I couldn't find a good book on how to estimate rehab costs. And it's one of the most difficult parts of being or growing into a successful real estate investor is knowing how to estimate your costs, how much everything costs. So that was my second. Third book was the book on negotiating real estate, which I wrote with my wife and my amazing co-author, Mark Ferguson. And it talks basically about the process of negotiating, but specifically for real estate investors and how to negotiate for real estate deals. Then I wrote a book on economic cycles and how economic cycles work, especially as it relates to real estate and real estate investors. Basically, how to invest successfully through all different parts of the real estate or the economic cycle. And then finally, about 6 months ago, I released a book called Real Estate by the Numbers, which is basically all the math and finance that goes into evaluating, analyzing real estate deals and just understanding the math and the numbers behind real estate. Because at the end of the day, well, like I said multiple times, real estate's both an art and a science. The science part is pretty straightforward, and we all need to understand the numbers and the math and the formulas to mix in with the art side of the deal.
And all of that information will be in our show notes as well. Jay, what was the most difficult negotiating skill that you had to learn and acquire?
It's a really good question. Probably the simplest, and that's the use of silence in negotiation. And we all talk about this. I think everybody knows that silence is kind of a benefit when negotiating. But what does this really mean? It works at multiple levels. So we all know that, like we think about that Wolf of Wall Street type movie where we see 2 hard-nosed guys or gals negotiating against each other, and they're sitting at the table and one of them just stares at the other and they're staring each other down and nobody's talking, and we think of that as kind of silence to kind of create uncomfortableness and pressure on either side, and certainly that's the case, but silence can be used in a lot more ways, and so my wife is really good at, a lot of times when we do real estate deals, it's not face to face. A lot of times they're going back and forth over text or email, or maybe there are contracts that are going back and forth. And so my wife has been very good at basically saying, hey, anytime somebody talks to us, sends us information, solicits us, wait before responding. Give them time to wonder what we're thinking, because when they're wondering what we're thinking, in their mind, they're creating scenarios. And typically they're creating scenarios that are bad for them. They're thinking of all the worst case scenarios. So they send us an offer, and instead of responding back with a counter offer a half hour later, we wait 24 hours. What are they doing in that 24 hours? They're sitting there thinking, oh, did they get another offer? Are they negotiating another offer? Are they thinking about taking the property off the market? Are they thinking about changing the price? What are they doing? Why aren't they responding to us? And in their mind, they're creating scenarios that are probably kind of panic scenarios for them. And so that's good for us. Because it basically means that they're going to be more psychologically prepared for a lower counteroffer, or they're going to be more psychologically prepared to get turned down. And so when negotiating, silence is a tremendously effective tool. I'm really bad at it. And so that's the skill that I've had to work on the most. When somebody sends me an offer, I'm like, okay, let's get this wrapped up. Let's send a counteroffer. My wife's like, no, let's wait 24 hours. Yeah. Or she'll get an email and she'll say, okay, well, we're going to dinner. I'll respond at 12 o'clock tonight and they'll get it tomorrow morning. Or she gets a text and she's like, okay, I don't need to respond to the text right now. So silence is a tremendously powerful tool when it comes to negotiating, but not just, again, when you're face to face, also when you're going back and forth through other mediums.
Yeah. Also, your wife, you had mentioned that your wife is very empathetic. Silence can convey empathy as well,
Yeah.
if done correctly. But yes, waiting that time, that's difficult. It certainly is for me. It's like, oh, I got to respond right now. So good tip. Thanks for that, Jay. Jay, what is one negotiated deal that if you could, you would return to and redo it and do it differently?
There are a whole lot of them. I've been tremendously conservative throughout my career, and my wife tends to be a lot more aggressive when it comes to doing deals than I am. But for some reason, she's trusted me to make the final decisions, and so over the course of our careers, I've said no to maybe hundreds, literally hundreds of deals that, in retrospect, I was probably being a little bit too conservative. One of the things that I look back on and I sort of wear as a badge of honor, but I also realize is a big negative, is that of the literally, I mean, I've probably done close to 1,000 deals. I don't keep count, but I've only lost money, or we've only lost money on one deal. And so a lot of people think that's a tremendous badge of honor. And I sort of wear that as a badge of honor. And I'm like, look how great we've done, only losing money on one deal. But at the end of the day, that's also indicative of the fact that we're tremendously conservative, and maybe too conservative, and that being a little bit more aggressive, sure, we may have had some more losses. And again, it's different if you're using other people's money versus your own. We typically use our own, so we can justify it. But losing money on a few deals is indicative that you're taking chances and you're taking some risks. And I'm not saying risk taking for the sake of risk taking is always a good thing, but it certainly has its place when investing, and the appropriate level of risk is important. And so I think we haven't necessarily taken the appropriate level of risk. And so for a lot of the negotiations that I've gone into over the last decade and a half, I think I've kind of set my bottom line or my top line, depending on which side I was on, too high or too low, and ended up negotiating myself out of deals that I probably shouldn't have done. And so I know a lot of people, and we talk about this all the time, is that you need to know what your bottom line number is, and you need to stick with it. And a lot of people have this problem where they'll get into the heat of a negotiation and they'll buy for more than they expected, or they'll sell for less than they had said they would. But some people actually have the opposite problem, and so I think I'm one of them, where I actually am too conservative, and I set those numbers probably too conservatively.
Jay, it's been a pleasure having you today. Wonderful information. Thanks for being on our show.
Thanks so much, Alan.
Enlightened investors, wait, don't go just yet. I just want to remind you about our recently launched webinar that you will not want to miss. If you're at all curious and would like to learn more about how real estate investing can diversify your investment portfolio, alleviate the anxiety associated with Wall Street swings, leverage your 401ks and IRAs to substantially increase the return on your investment, and do all of this with turnkey, hands-off, passive real estate investments, then you'll want to immediately go to stevetalker.com/webinar. In the webinar, we'll also address the common dubious investment schemes that you want to avoid. To access the webinar, go to stevetalker.com/webinar. I look forward to seeing you in the webinar.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Estate Investing Abundance, brought to you by Steve Talker Capital, a company working for passionate professionals like you to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steve Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steve Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. For resources to develop your financial independence, connect with us at stevetalker.com.